Greetings, this is Dr. Rebecca Wood, and I would like to welcome you to the Week 7 lecture. This week we will be discussing the ideas of war versus peace. Our first author this week is Sun Tzu, who, as far as we know, wrote The Art of War. And it turns out that the existence of a historical figure named Sun Tzu cannot actually be proven. The book attributed to him could have been written by more than one person or developed over time by multiple persons, essentially a work written by a committee, maybe. The Art of War shaped the military strategies of China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam for nearly 2,500 years. And you'll notice the documentation here of the material from our book, and it was written by the editor/author of the book, Michael Austin. The Art of War also became a very popular business book around the turn of this millennium, and so we might want to think about whether there should be or is a relationship between the way a general would lead an army to war and the way a business competes in the marketplace. Our next author is Thomas Aquinas, who was born nearly 800 years ago into wealth and privilege. He could have had just a really fancy, easy life, but instead he received a classical education, and then he became committed to the Dominican order and the Catholic Church, even though his family really wanted him to join the family business and do something else. And Thomas Aquinas spent many years studying Aristotle and working to use Aristotle's logical methods to explain and study the revealed truths of the Bible and Christianity. And Thomas Aquinas was very prolific. He wrote lots and lots of deductive proofs on more than 600 major subjects. Here's a cover image from some of his books. The Summa Theologica, which was his greatest work, was a summary of theology, and so this would be what you'd need to read if you're going to read the entire summary of theology by Thomas Aquinas. And in his proofs he began by listing the objections to a rhetorical question or statement, and then he refuted those objections with detailed replies, and he used logical reasoning and extensive quotation and interpretation of the Bible to refute the objections. Our next author is Desiderius Erasmus, and he was born more than 500 years ago, so he was born much more recently than our first two authors, and he was born in much less wealthy circumstances than Thomas Aquinas, and he was an out-of-wedlock child of a Catholic priest, and he didn't have a fancy upbringing, but he did receive a first-class education, and he was a scholar, and he wrote some important works of theology and philosophy, as well as creating editions of the New Testament in both Greek and Latin. So he was a really smart guy, and I think this is a really cool statue of him. And Erasmus was a humanist, studying those disciplines we now call humanities, such as literature, art, and history. And I don't know if you've noticed or not, but there's kind of an argument going on in the academic field as to whether we should study the humanities as much as we study things like computer science and business. And so we might kind of wonder how Erasmus would think about that argument. And the essay in our book begins with a Latin phrase that means, "War is sweet to them that know it not," meaning if you haven't been in a war, you might think it looks better than it really is. And Erasmus lovingly describes the way God created humans and shaped them, quote, "not to war, but to friendship, not to wrong, but to kindness and benevolence." And when I documented this, I left out a big chunk, but it did not change the meaning, so I put an ellipsis here, and then I have documented the quote. And Margaret Mead is the final author we studied this week, and she was born in 1901. After receiving her PhD in anthropology, she went to American Samoa and did an extensive fieldwork project, and that became the foundation of her best-selling book, Coming of Age in Samoa. And her work included the essay in our book in which she examined whether warfare was a biological necessity, a sociological inevitability, or just a bad invention. And so she contended that social inventions have been modified or replaced. such as the development of trial by jury rather than trial by combat. And therefore Meade had hopes that humanity could invent something less destructive than war, a new invention. And so her idea was, quote, a form of behavior becomes out of date only when something else takes its place, and before that can happen, humanity must believe that such an invention is possible. So I have here a picture of peace lilies, hoping that at some point soon humanity can come up with a better invention than warfare. And then this is my works cited page for this presentation. You'll notice that every author that I quoted from is in the works cited list, and I alphabetized it by the first word in each listing. It looks like I made a little mistake here. Look, I forgot to indent this second line, so you want to watch that in your papers. And then I have also put in the Britannica article, which is where I got the image of St. Thomas Aquinas. And so we always want to try to document our sources as best we can, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you.